Happy Friday, everybody, and it's time to jump into it. So we're recording this, so we're not going to necessarily wait for anybody else that might be dialing in a little after the hour. So I'll do some quick intros, and then we'll get into it. My name is Christian Sorensen, founder and chief risk officer for SiteGain. But more importantly, I'm joined by distinguished panelists today. So I want to introduce them individually and then start getting into the questions and their insights for the year. So first is David Newman. He is self-described recovering CISO, but also retired Air Force communications and cyber warfare officer. He's been a consultant with Ernst & Young. He did his CISO time at iHeartMedia, BISO at Dell, and now is senior analyst for TAG Cyber, as well as an adjunct professor at UT San Antonio. So David, thanks for joining today. Looking forward to hearing your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Jeffrey Bell is dialing in from the Carolinas. He is been a computer engineer, also a SOC analyst, leading blue teams as well as threat intelligence teams, and then growing the team. He's in as a senior information analyst at North Stella. So Jeffrey, thanks for joining today.
Thanks so much.
And Peter Schabacher, he is very experienced as well. So he's been a computer engineer, an advisor, consultant with Deloitte and others, managing director for an MDR provider, profit and loss leader for cybersecurity services at Optiv, a CISO at Proxius, and is now, and most recently, CEO at Nearshore Cyber. So Peter is joining us from Mexico. Thanks for dialing in today, Peter.
Orale. Glad to be here.
So the theme for today is 2024 SecOps Year in Review. So insights from the front lines as well as from providers and consultants, right? So we have all of those bases covered today. So let's dive into it. I'm going to have the first question as, are we the same, better, or worse this year than last year?
From my personal experience, I think we're definitely in a better place than we were last year. I kind of put that on a couple different things. One is we're seeing a lot more democratization when it comes to whether it be threat intelligence, reporting, all of that kind of stuff. Vendors and also kind of defenders are really doing a great job trying to publish a lot of content. So there's a lot out there now. We're not seeing that segmentation that we've seen in the past where everyone's really just kind of holding on to what they're seeing. So I think that's a really important thing. A lot of open source tooling as well. A lot of like red team tools that as defenders we can utilize in our own kind of internal audits, in our own kind of threat hunts. So that's really cool. And then finally, I just think overall the security community continues to help each other out, whether that be on Reddit, LinkedIn, any other kind of platform, Mastodon, Blue Sky. Like there's just a huge community out there. I think it's one of the most welcoming communities that you can find in the entire kind of job vertical out there, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's an optimistic spin definitely on this year in review.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that kind of the front line sort of perspective there. David, what have you seen this year?
I love Jeffrey's observations, first of all, because I think that really kind of puts the quantifiable kind of reasons that we're seeing improvement. With all the news you hear, you would think we weren't doing anything or things were really bad because the bad things that happen get a lot of attention, as they should. But I do think we're making improvements, and the improvements are really driven by three things in my mind. And at TAG, we track on about 5,000 pure play cyber vendors, and we talk to about 10% of those a year, just seeing where they're at, what they're doing. But first is economics, right? There is a portfolio rationalization that is undergoing, especially at the enterprise level, to simplify their tech stack component of this so that they can really operationalize effectively. And that leads to the second one, is the operational. This is what I call convergence in theory, is working across business units to really understand how they may be at risk and how to better make them more resilient, and then to better defend them. And because we are seeing, I think we're seeing an increase of this as the force multiplier for adversaries, especially nation state and organized crime. And then the last thing is, and I think this may be provocative for our audience a little bit, and I hope that it is, to start a rational conversation. I think we're seeing a talent shift, right? We are investing in talent to move our people from tool administrators to problem solvers. So I think that those three higher level kind of observations on why I think things are getting better or have gotten better in 2024 will continue.
I guess from your perspective, in terms of better this year, what have you seen specifically that's worked in your neck of the woods and in your experience over the 2024?
Humility. 2024 sucked. Let's just be direct about that. It really went sideways in the fourth quarter 2023, and those who remember back that far will recall that, you know, whereas Q4 is normally when you break through break even and see a lot of business and you set yourself up for the next year, Q4 2023 was a horror show. It was like the worst. It was worse than any Q1 I've ever seen in 28 years in this business. And so it was a very difficult year. It was one in which we in the industry realized we're not special. Cybersecurity is not cool to anybody but us. And in 2024, it stopped being cool even to us. Venture capital receded, the cost of money got really high. And so the investments from the vendor side, and in terms of like the buzz and the noise that comes from Wall Street, just disappeared. And everybody had to take a hard look at value. Everybody had to take a hard look at numbers and start managing security like a business for real and stop just talking about it and doing it. And a lot of us screwed it up. So it was the kind of year where we had to build character, we had to learn how to deal with adversity, we had to let go of our own shiny tools and decide what's really going to work versus what do we do to entertain each other and do things the way that we had done things for the prior 15 years. So it's not a tool, it's not a technology, it's more a matter of attitude and character, humility, frugality, and attention to what the real needs are. And I think we're set up extremely well for the rise of AI and a return to something more stable, although who knows, but like 2025, 2026 are looking really good.
Awesome. And that's certainly from the business perspective. I'm wondering, Jeffrey, if you have some wins or some specific examples you can share from your experience in 2024.
Yeah, definitely. So every threat report you were kind of reading that was looking at 2024 all kind of hit on the same principles. We were seeing a lot of identity attacks, cloud attacks. So from a blue team perspective, that was really where we were trying to get after, making sure with the rise of SaaS, our identities went from being on-prem to in the cloud to now across everything. It's some kind of SAML authentication gives someone one-click access to any application they want. Mm-hmm. So using that, we're really trying to kind of get after what profiles users have across the board, where they might be susceptible, making sure SSO is behind all of that, and really making sure that you can track somebody across their day-to-day business, just in case any kind of compromise occurs. Some other things that I want to hit at is my company is a smaller company, so we have a lot of incredible people there, and we're able to work really close together with each other. So our cloud ops, DevOps teams, instead of kind of what might happen if it's a larger company, it might be a little more segmented, siloed. We're able to work really closely with them and then build those relationships throughout 2024. So that way we're not just messaging them about, hey, a detection we found. We're kind of building those relationships at the start of 2024. So then when we have to go talk about projects, talk about a detection that we saw, then it's a lot more of a relationship. We can work with them, try to tune something instead of just like a ticket on their board. So I think that kind of speaks to what I was talking about before about how just across technology, we're seeing everybody has to come together. Budgets are tight, so there's not kind of that financial element to just kind of go out and do all these incredible projects. You really have to look at what you have and strengthen that to the core. And then lastly, I think is super important as we see threat intelligence just continue to grow and become almost on the AI level of a buzzword. You want to demand value. So that's something that we've done all year, demanding value out of threat intelligence. If we're going to pay for some subscription, if we're going to utilize some kind of model, it has to be incorporated, it has to be utilized. It can't just sit on the shelf, because that's the worst thing that you can do with this incredible technology. So those are kind of three things that I'm really proud of my team, my company, that we've been able to hit on this year.
Awesome.
Christian, Jeffrey's observation there. Can I jump in with a question just to ask him about something?
Yeah,
Just follow up. So, prior to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I thought we saw a really high quality amount of information coming out of the federal government. It's in a joint way,
Sure.
FBI says so on and so forth. And I thought that those were two things. One was extremely informative, and it was unifying as well. It's just like, this is what you could expect. Do you feel like that the federal government is doing a better job of building cohesion, sharing information? It always hasn't been that way. I always felt like it was a one-way thing in those relationships, whether it was a creator or something else. We gave a lot from the civilian side, but we never got a lot back. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's gotten better? You commented on like the amount of sharing that's going on generally among us, which is absolutely powerful. But what do you think? Thoughts on the federal government? Are they doing a better job in your opinion?
Yeah, I really think that they have. I was just reading a threat bulletin that was released about Bien Lien ransomware this morning from CISA.
Yeah.
It was very detailed. It had TTPs, kind of all that stuff that you would expect from a security vendor. I think if there's any comment I can make, it'd be awesome to kind of continue to see those links. A lot of times, just because of the nature of intelligence, stuff is delayed about when it's reported, which makes sense. There's different methodologies about why that might be the case. But sometimes it's more of like a post-mortem when really it should be an alert. So that's the only thing I would kind of say, continuing for security vendors who might really have that intelligence that they can see, working with those like signals teams, working with those intelligence teams that the federal government has to kind of get that complete picture and then issue timely alerts, and really have to kind of weigh that balance if something might mess up a continuing some kind of operation with the need to, hey, this company's looks like they're going to be targeted. Like, let's get out there. We're seeing this vulnerability being used. So just trying to weigh those two. Obviously, it's very difficult.
I was going to turn it back, return the favor, David. For your kind of 3 points, Peter touched on the economics, Jeffrey touched on the ops, as well as this convergence, like things have to work together. I guess from your market perspective, what makes you optimistic of what you're seeing and some of the progress that's being made in the market?
I think that there's two things: making better use of what we have as opposed to reaching for a new tech stack to do something that we already have 3 tech stacks for. That we're seeing a lot of that, and that's pushed from innovative thinking, creative doing, asymmetric thinking on how we can do things smarter and better. It's just like we're seeing in a better cooperation in the community. We're also seeing better cooperation across the business. There's not the friction that there used to be sometimes, because it's no longer, here's the things you need to do. We're giving people bad report cards and all that stuff. We're focused on the things that are really important. The other thing that I've seen, and I haven't seen it widely, and I think we're right on the precipice of doing it, is operational discipline. One of the things I do, I commanded the Air Force's first cyber hunting unit before we had some of the great capabilities that we had today. All the intelligence that the government spends money on, we did not have much at all in the cyberspace. So we used to go out and kind of collect our own and do our own derivatives. But I wrote a course last year for UT, a graduate level course in cyber threat hunting. And it's these operational phases on how you plan, execute, and assess like some kinds of operations that give us a more active defense foothold on what's going on. So, operational discipline that gives us a more proactive footing and takes the fight to the adversary, as opposed to that. So many cliches about shifting left and those kinds of things. But now we're starting to see really organizations thinking about, goes back to my first observation, how are we using what we have better and reusing it effectively? So the ability to take intelligence with the tech stack you have, tie that together, execute an operation that is well planned and understood and valued, has tremendous outcomes. So I think those are the two things for me.
Awesome. So we've talked a fair amount of kind of the different levels from the on the ground front line to kind of here's the operational business level, and then starting to touch on across business units. I think it would be useful just to dive into that kind of the frontline perspective one more time to say, all right, at the end of the day, and David, you just mentioned it and touched on it, that we are trying to get our arms around kind of the core basic blocking and tackling, if you will. We need to be good at the basics, and then we can build from there. And that's been a theme that I've heard time and again this year, but also through some of the comments here. So I'm wondering kind of basic blocking and tackling in terms of end-to-end security operations, protection, blocking, detection, alerting perspective. You guys are doing this every day. Where are you seeing progress being made in that regard? Where are you hopeful that progress will be made in the future?
It's really easy to do process design right now. Super easy. Thank you. The usual LLMs. You can take like current documentation and tickets and like the artifacts that we leave behind when we do work, and a couple of hours produce really good new processes. Getting people to execute on them and to use them and to change the way that they do things is hard, right? Now, I think that to the point about the basics, the problem is the basics have shifted. In fact, that shift started happening late. The concentration on sort of administrative tools and operating systems and networks that we were doing in 1999, where we were looking at things like improper use of Telnet, then SSH, then NNTP, then UUCP, like all this very sort of techie stuff. The SecOps world stayed there far too long, far too long. What are the basics really? Applications now. And so the trouble with the basics is it's not foundational and essential to SecOps. It moves. This is why so many of us are shifting to things like threat-informed defense, which is not a new concept. Like MITRE and the idea of threat-informed defense is how old? 8 years, I think, maybe longer, probably before they started writing about it. The concentration on things like serverless, which comes with cloud, also not new, but security is just catching up to this. And now you have like Billy, who runs the motor pool, writing applications on AI, like writing rudimentary pipelines and agents from a Udemy course that he bought for $9. You can get one for $9. It's excellent. The point is that what it is to cover the basics is nothing like what most people in the industry think it is. Now, what it means is you're going to have people who look like innovators who are really just addressing what's happening now, and an awful lot of people who are going to struggle to catch up. A lot of them are going to drop out. It's fine. They need new jobs. Maybe they should run the motor pool. If there's a motor pool. Sorry, it's an old-fashioned notion. It's like having a typing pool.
Awesome. Yeah. So, and then Jeffrey, you're in the mix. You're in the thick of it. So, I guess from your perspective, does that resonate with you in terms of kind of AppSec being, if not front and center, kind of being one of the things you have to pay attention to, and even some of the AI sort of stuff coming into your environment?
Definitely, yeah. So, yeah, AI is definitely one of those words that luckily in the kind of the tech world, we know that AI has existed a little bit longer than when ChatGPT created it. You know what I mean? But still, like we've been using AI for so long in this space. But I think with all of these LLMs and stuff, we're just seeing like a different perspective of that, which is really cool. And we're kind of utilizing it in a different way than it's historically been used. But yeah, to what Peter was talking about with detections and really the AppSec perspective of it is crucial. Like I talked about earlier with SaaS, it's just going to change everything. Like our identities live in the cloud now, or live in these SaaS applications now. We saw with Snowflake earlier this year that Snowflake was a lot of times being provisioned by and unknown really to some people on the security team across the board. And that was pretty much evident by kind of the response that we saw in the industry. Delayed, there was no MFA on a lot of Snowflake instances. And as a result, info stealers were just able to just kind of collect these credentials that were able to be used. Like I said, with no MFA, just wreaking complete havoc. So I think it's so important, and I'll keep making kind of joints back to what I talked earlier about, but that partnership with your cloud ops, your DevOps team, your marketing team, understanding if your company is developing products, you need to kind of have that forefront. You need to see at that table because innovation's happening. And if security is not at that table to really be a part of it, then things are going to get spun up and you're just going to be left out of kind of that conversation, and you'll be finding out secondhand when an incident emerges or something like that.
I just want to come back to there's this discussion between, hey, there's threats are evolving, basic blocking and tackling is changing over time, but we have to kind of make sure we're using the tools that we have, right? So that balance of we got to keep up, but we have to make sure that things are effective. What are you seeing in terms of that tension? How are leaders that you're talking to dealing with that? What's your sense of that tension?
I'll put it in two categories. There are those organizations that are running a very mature operation, and you have those other ones that are trying to accelerate towards that level of maturity. And there's something that the two are doing in common that I think is making real progress. So that was your first question, is like, what's the brass tacks that we're doing? And now there's a realization and understanding of that, horizontally and vertically, of the value in it. The thing that you say as a CISO, two-time CISO, people used to ask me a lot, like, what keeps you up at night? And it was the thing that got me up most of the night was, have I done everything in my power to prepare my team to fight tonight, right? Like, are they ready? And so the ability, what these two teams or these two sides of the equation are doing that they have in common, that are either accelerating or are continuing to optimize their maturity, is the ability to say, how do you know, right? So like taking a threat and pushing it through some kind of threat exposure management platform that allows you to say immediately, these are the things where we have great weaknesses. These are the things that we should do. These are the informed prioritizations. These are the stakeholders that we've built. And so that's changed the equation from graduated response to immediate action. And I think that's been highly effectual for organizations to do that. And it's done two things too. It's optimized that technology that I referred to earlier, but we're enhancing the skills and experience and the lethality, if you want to say it like that, of the operators that are defending the companies and the enterprises that they're there to do. That's much more rewarding, right, in doing operations that way, as opposed to just coming in and being like a moth in a lamp, waiting for a bad thing to happen. So we really are seeing those shifts between those either mature organizations or those organizations that are accelerating towards that level of maturity. That seems to be the thing that they both have in common.
Peter, I'm going to ask how that resonates with you. But I'm going to ask that you look at it through the lens of MITRE ATT&CK. Both you and Jeffrey have mentioned MITRE ATT&CK before. Does that work for your teams and the organizations that you work with? How does that come into play to kind of inform that perspective that David was sharing?
MITRE ATT&CK was like this. It's funny. I can be such a jerk sometimes when it comes to new ideas. I used to call it just the big bingo card of SecOps, and like I just poo-pooed it. And I think there's still a tendency in some laggers to look at it that way. But look, frameworks are not something that you have to do. They're tools, right? In the same way that you don't build a house without a scaffold, you don't build a complex program without that. And his MITRE, just mad love to MITRE and the work they do. They didn't just build it and walk away. The problem with MITRE and problem with all the rest of it is there's just too much. David, you talked about maturity. There's maturity in terms of repetition, and then there's maturity in terms of being able to innovate and having these frameworks and habits and cultures. And the world was smashed by COVID. It was smashed, and that we really finally reached the end of a certain phase of the recovery from the pandemic around about 3 to 5 months ago. That's when it happened. And we started to see the wreckage, and then see the opportunities, and see that we'd all been changed, and I think mostly for the better. AI comes along 2 years ago, and people started to really pick up on it, and there were some tools that became accessible. Again, like the basics shifted. There was a transfer of attention from across different sort of layers of technology. So what the people who stuck to the frameworks religiously are finding themselves disappointed. They're mature at the wrong things. You can be really mature at bad habits, or you can become resilient, as most of us had to do after the pandemic, and learn to see the world differently and live differently and do business differently and do SecOps differently and think about threats differently. Something really interesting has occurred as a result of this. Although there's more activity out of the threat actors, they have not really changed that much. Yes, they're using some AI. Yes, they're generating higher volume and more subtly different and harder to detect phishing messages. They have not really innovated all that well. One problem is a lot of them are in Ukraine and Russia, and they're busy. The point is that it can work for you, it can work against you. Make it work for you as you turn it into a tool kit and a way of framing your thinking so you can innovate.
How are you using MITRE ATT&CK within your company and with your team?
Yeah, I just had to write that down, what Peter said, make MITRE work for you. I think that's wonderfully said, because it's overwhelming sometimes, like just going on Reddit or really talking to anybody in this landscape from different organizations, how they're using MITRE. Everyone's using it a different way, and you always feel like, oh, we should be using it that way, or I didn't even think about that. So I think it's really cool. Definitely overwhelming because there's not enough hours in the day to kind of incorporate all of that. We use MITRE, we try to incorporate it as much as possible. I mean, it really is extraordinary. There's so much you can do with it, like I said. And at the same time, you really have to think about kind of what you're trying to achieve out of it. I think that's the biggest thing. And also, you really want to understand, not just mapping it's too simple. You want to take that next step, or not, mapping it isn't simple, but the value is in the next step. Because in that next step of MITRE, after you map, okay, I think this adversary is going to do X, Y, or Z, then you can say, okay, here's the detection I can build around that. And here's how I can mitigate whatever that technique is. So you're taking, because in CTI we love just to write reports and stuff like that, and then hand it, and then it gets cobwebs on the shelf. Like, no, we have to take that next step. It's not enough just to say that X adversary is going to do Y. No, we need to say they're going to do Y, but here's how we detect that, and here's how we mitigate that risk. So I think that's the most important thing. That's something my organization is going for every day, how to actually get value out of everything that we're using.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I think that starts to tie together some of the things that we're seeing. Verizon releases their DBIR report every year. They highlighted this continuing trend. It was about 30% of the compromises that are due to errors and misconfigurations, right? So even if you had the right solution and it was in the right spot, it still is susceptible to not being set up correctly. What we're seeing a lot too is that organizations will take MITRE ATT&CK and start to test against that, to say, hey, we as an enterprise organization are good to go, and you can sleep well at night, or for consultants to take that out and help with their either prospects or customers to help them make that improvement. I guess from that perspective, Peter, are you seeing organizations that you're talking to receptive to that? Is that a conversation that is easy to have to say, hey, we're going to help you protect against threats. Let's see how you're doing and then help level up your game. Is that part of the current lexicon out there?
You know, if you have an evangelist who has the years and the credibility necessary to make the case for testing and using MITRE as a way to visualize what you're testing and not testing, you're always not testing an infinite number of conditions. You're testing a small subset of things that are hopefully the most important. If you've got somebody to sell that idea across the spectrum of parties who are involved, you have a shot. Mm-hmm. Most organizations are not succeeding yet. There will be people who say things like breach and attack simulation instead. They're wrong. They just need to be patient. So as with any important change, there have to be people within organizations who are willing to stick their necks out and do the hard work over long periods of time and win support with results. MITRE is, and it's an interesting artifact and it's a touchstone. Why are we talking about it so much? Because it's visually appealing and it lives and breathes in ways that nothing else that I know ever has. I wonder what there is outside of cybersecurity that business people look at similarly. And I think this is one of the things that we need to do as an industry and participants within it, is to think about the perspective of our clients and the customers they serve. I sort of reached a new level of understanding of MITRE about a year and a half ago, and I built an MDR division for an MSSP. And they had very large customers coming in as their first customers. And the first one happened to be particularly smart. And in the very first conversation, they started using like the TTP IDs, like the T blah, blah, blah number, like everyone knew them.
Yeah.
And I do this for a living. I'm like, oh boy, I guess I'm going to start memorizing those numbers.
Yeah.
And I realized there's a like, anytime you have something that's good, that has a lot of sort of technical underpinning, you run the risk, or pretty much will create a kind of geeky silo populated by people who love it, who now speak another language that the customers don't speak and won't speak.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all about end to end. It's about being able to be strategic, right? But it's also got to get down to and to be translatable by people who are at the tactical level and the technical level, so that everybody can collaborate up and down, left to right.
I want to come back to what you talked about up front, is this rationalization, right? So without any constraints on that conversation, how do organizations successfully rationalize their cyber portfolio? What are they doing successfully, or what should they be doing from your perspective?
I think that there's two things that they need to do specifically. They need to integrate, not just amongst themselves. At TAG, we have this taxonomy of 20 categories and subcategories for different capabilities that the tech stacks deliver. And what we find is most organizations have double, triple, quadruple capabilities in each of those taxonomies. And we get it. Big enterprises, sometimes there's not a one kind of cut approach, but typically how we've ended up in that boat is because we've really not considered integration beyond the security organization. And now integration is paramount on how we do capabilities. And to Jeffrey's point, process is easy, or process development easy, execution is Herculean. So those integration things, when we do those better, we get successful rationalization from the outside. And look, let's be honest. The security teams typically do not own the things that they're protecting, right? And they're predominantly cost centers. They're not P&Ls, so they're always in somewhat of a race to the bottom. So, but a lot of that rationalization can pay for itself. The second thing that I think organizations are starting to see is, and again, this is probably going to be somewhat provocative, and I hope it is, I believe that we have produced an entire generation of tool administrators. And we have not produced, we're not spending enough time on building problem solvers and asymmetric thinkers. And so what happens is that professional development from this manager to proverbially to this senior director level, they get relegated to technical competencies, right? And so when you're challenged to think about how do you integrate, how to communicate the value to a business unit that maybe you really need to partner with, all those things start to fall by the wayside. So I think that's the operationalization and integration that needs to happen. Here's my thing. A fight is coming. Not like in cyber necessarily, but a big fight is coming. In the military, when Christian and I served, before we were going into the battle, we called it shaping the environment, right? Shaping is happening now, and it's going to happen, and your organization is going to be impacted, most likely indirectly in a material way, perhaps directly, depending on what industry vertical you sit in. I just posted a link to an essay that I wrote last year that includes a piece on cyber and war. This isn't about military battles and all that stuff. The asymmetric approach and the hybrid warfare, total warfare state that we're seeing the globe in today, and you don't have to be a genius to know where the hotspots are. A fight is coming, and it's going to be somewhere between now and 2027. And so you need to think way beyond what you're doing and what your company's doing, sometimes, and where you're getting your key services or products from others. That requires integration and certain skill sets. So I would encourage anybody that is involved, or to the thousands that are connected to us today, that are thinking about, what do I need to train my folks for in 2025? Maybe it's not the SANS course. I mean, I'm not saying that stuff is bad, but what development is out there to really get them to think, how do I do integration in this? How do I do ops planning and execution? How do I continue to make sure I stay ahead of the emerging threats that we know are coming? So I hope that's helpful, but I thought it was important to jam those in. Fight's on, it's coming, shaping's happening now, and we need to be ready for it.
25, what does that look like? What are you going to be focused on? And how are you going to try to shape that in the next year?
I think a lot of what we talked about today, identity, cloud, SaaS, like from a tactical standpoint, that's the stuff that we're seeing our adversaries go after. So it would only make sense to kind of follow in kind of what we talked about. A couple of things I just want to run down, and 3 things that we're kind of looking at as kind of a cybersecurity community for 2025. AI threats, definitely. We've seen a little bit of like LLM or like ChatGPT, kind of like those comments and code that they generate. We've seen that in some malware samples. I've seen reports of that. We're also seeing kind of ransomware shift from just pure ransomware that we think about, encryption, you kind of get listed on the DLS, to now we're seeing only data extortion for a couple adversaries. Bienlin and Meow both are kind of switching to this model, which makes it a lot harder to detect as defenders. Obviously, we're not seeing all of our files encrypted, so it's a little bit harder to detect when that's happening, when someone's in. And then finally, info stealers. That's a big one that we're continuing to see. Everything I see behind MFA, it's way too easy now with info stealers. So if hopefully everybody here has MFA, but you got to think broader than even just like what you're doing for your company, like your personal stuff. Checking on your friends, your parents, grandparents, and make sure that if they have anything that touches the internet, make sure there's at least MFA behind it. We'd be naive to think that things are just 2025 is going to be an easy year. There's no indication of that, so we're going to continue to keep fighting.
Peter, for 2025, what are your thoughts? Where are you focused and excited about?
I'm going to spend more time with my family. A lot of us fought like hell through 2024, and we paid for it in all sorts of ways. And I think we need to take 2025 and take care of ourselves, each other. I think I've heard community a lot. I love that. For me, like my mission is to serve the community again and again and again and again for fun and for free and for love. And then every now and then it feeds me back. And we're going to keep doing that. And we're going to keep taking care of each other. We're going to keep healing from all the craziness of the past, 6 years. And we're going to start to bear the benefits of that. I think AI is already bringing some really interesting applications. And we're at the 14.4 modem stage, comparing to the internet. So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. So some themes for today. I'll open it up to any other final comments, but some themes for today, 2024 into 2025 is community, right? To work together, to share, to give, and to receive, but also integration, right? At the tool level. So things have to work together. You can't just come to market and say, hey, it's our way or the highway. It has to work for others that are out there. AI is coming. Threats continue to emerge. You have to kind of understand where you're at. And if you don't know where you're at, it's hard to get where you need to go. And what we've seen is you'll be surprised along the way. So before I close things out, I just want to see if there's any final thoughts from the panelists or other ideas that you all want to share.
I'll go first. Probably a thank you to all the professionals out there that are doing really great work. I mean, it's just so easy to get wrapped up on what we're doing wrong and the bad things that happen in our space. But know that what you're doing is not going unnoticed. We are getting better. I wish I had half the talent and capabilities that you all are orchestrating and operating today back when I was in ops, and I really appreciate it. Right? I mean, there's more to it than just protecting the stuff that you're in, and I think anytime we drive up the cost and level of effort of jerks, bad guys that are trying to do bad things, that's a good day for everybody. So thanks for all you're doing out there. Have a wonderful holiday too.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank all the panelists, Jeffrey for joining, Peter for jumping on, David for coming in to share your wisdom, your experience, your insights, your questions, your ideas. We really appreciate it. And like David said, a lot of good work is being done. A lot of these kind of sessions that others can benefit from. We're going to be sharing these out and hopefully helping to move the needle as the community continues to grow and evolve. So thank you all for joining today and really appreciate your time and look forward to catching up